What's up, Ethan?
No, nothing, man.
How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good.
Your hair looks great.
Thanks. I kind of, I just did, I don't know, didn't do anything different except that it's different.
You zhushed it up.
I zhushed it up. I went up.
Did you zhush it up for this recording?
I didn't mean to, but I actually saw that it was zhushed, and then I zhushed it a little extra.
You're like, I didn't mean to, but I'm not mad at it.
I actually didn't go to the bathroom just now. I was just in
the mirror. Well, in case you guys didn't know, this is episode 4 of Coach's Corner with Justin and Ethan.
That's us.
I am one of 2 fantastic coaches and co-hosts, Justin Schollard.
Yeah, and I'm Ethan Wolf.
So we're going to dive into strength training today, which is something that obviously you can tell by looking at us that we obsess over. But if I think about just like why we're doing this show, we're really trying to help people get clarity on the right path, cut through some of the noise, focus on the 20% of things that are going to get them 80% of the results.
Right.
And this is where strength training, I think, is just so important because it needs to be the foundation. I think it needs to be the cornerstone of everybody's program, whether you want to put on a bunch of muscle or whether you just want to put on a little bit of muscle, or maybe you just want to lose some body fat or just be a better, well-rounded, resilient human being. Strength training is so important.
Yeah, I can't say it enough. Something I try to convince people to choose the path is that I don't think a human's potential is fully expressed without some form of resistance training. That there's this huge cavern of potential that can just be filled in through resistance training. And not that other exercise doesn't fill in other potentials, but man, it's just something about it.
Yeah. I think that there's no more, I mean, I'm sure like an endurance athlete would say that when you're grinding and it's just such a mental battle, I get that. But there's also something about like when you're strength training and you're doing a lift, let's just use like a deadlift or a squat or any sort of like compound lift that's like challenging the nervous system. The reason why strength training is a skill set is because you have to manage those alarm bells and those instinctual warning signs that like you're under stress, abort. You have to manage those things while not knowing that you're not actually there yet and pushing through while not letting yourself impulsively just go into like some crazy position that could hurt you.
Just give up.
Yeah, right. Like what do they call that? Like a compensatory response, like a compensation response. Like, I'm under fatigue. Quick, recruit anything now. Just get it done. It's like survival mode.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it is interesting because once you've gotten in the groove, even, it waxes and wanes in life. And it's like there is that interesting moment where you're kind of on this other side of the line where you're like, let's fucking get like, you're like, ooh. And you're experiencing all this stress mentally, emotionally from experiencing the physical stress. And you're still just like, more. And I think there's like something so empowering about that, at least on a non-physical level, that when I notice I get to that other place where I'm like, oh, wow, that makes me feel powerful. Just in a general sense, right?
And it's so measurable. Like when you see that, like, okay, I started out at 100 pounds 3 months ago, and now I'm doing 150. It's like, whoa, I just increased my strength by 50%.
Yeah,
like that's pretty cool.
Right, or even just the perceived rate of exertion. We're like, oh, to do a set of 5 pull-ups was like, oh. Right now you're like, I'll do 5 pull-ups.
Every minute on the minute.
Let's go.
For 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And also, I think one of the topics we want to get into, too, it's just speaking of just like the joy of strength training, but why we think that it should be a cornerstone in your programming is because of the skill transfer.
Yeah.
Where I think that it's fair to say we're both on the same page here. We can make the argument that like a steady state cardio is kind of what we would consider kind of more like monostructural. It has its health benefits, which we talked about in our episode 2 cardio episode, but there's metabolic benefits, there's VO2 max, there's heart health and brain health that are associated with just even steady state cardio. But from like an athletic standpoint, there's not a skill transfer like there is with strength training. Like if I'm really good at like spinning or running, kind of narrows my ability to only be good at that one monostructural activity.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if I can deadlift 700 pounds, I'm probably a beast with like impact sports,
It's anything.
explosive sports. If I ever got into a fight and I had to like wrestle with somebody, but I'm that strong.
Carrying groceries,
Right.
picking up your kids off the
Yeah,
floor,
yeah, it
moving
kind of makes you
furniture.
bulletproof,
I
right.
mean, it's like the true applicability to life starts to really compound. Like, I've seen so many people that like play tennis, and there's very sport specific movements that you can do, like doing rotational movements for tennis. But even without doing them, and just going through a well balanced resistance training routine, their tennis game gets so much better. Whereas I think if you just started cycling and got your VO2 max up or your cardiovascular health up, it's not going to necessarily make you better at tennis.
No.
Right? So I think just having stronger joints, the ability to brace and just, transfer force and all that kind of stuff has so much applicability.
Yeah, it lowers the impact of day-to-day life. Like
Yeah.
if I can squat
Yeah.
400 pounds, and by the way, I can't, but let's just say one could, or let's just even use more realistic numbers. Like let's just say you can
200
squat a
pounds.
couple hundred pounds, okay?
Yeah.
Anybody who trains, male or female, if you're dedicated, at some point you're probably going to be able to hit a 200 pound squat, right? If I can squat that, well then what are the chances of me injuring myself just getting out of bed or getting off the chair? Probably very
Having to move
little.
the barbecue, just anything, right? Yeah, it's like it's so true. Okay, so what exactly is like resistance training? And I'm going to use the word resistance over strength training because I think that's a bigger umbrella.
I've thought about this, and I'm actually going to defer that to you because, in case you guys didn't know, Ethan is a strength and conditioning certified specialist,
That I am.
which means he has his degree in exercise science. So
Well, it's actually a degree and then a test.
it's
CSCS, Certified Strength Conditioning Specialist.
It's a
by the
certification
way.
you can only get
Yes,
if you
a-
have your
Yes.
degree in sports science.
Yeah.
Kinesiology.
Well, I think it's
Exercise
more. You
science.
have to have at least a bachelor's. Unfortunately, I think it could just be any bachelor's.
Oh, really?
But they just want you to be.
Still.
But I do have a
you do have
bachelor
it.
in exercise sciences.
So bless our ears.
So I think resistance training is a good overall umbrella because it implies any activity that imposes an external resistance to our musculature and our joints. So we have to overcome some type of resistance that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I think that then includes all of the ways that can happen. And so that can be weight training. That can be free weights like dumbbells and barbells. It can be a resistance machine that you see, which there are even various degrees and different, levels of how hard they are in terms of skill set. That can include your body weight, like calisthenics, gymnastics. Like think about a gymnastics ring routine.
Yeah.
It's definitely strength training. So, that can be pushing a sled. It can be odd object lifting, like lifting a sandbag or strongman competitions. In a certain sense, any overcoming of an external force is going to be like what I consider like a rower, which is that, strength training, not exactly. And I think that's where it will kind of, as an umbrella, be something that you cannot sustain more than maybe a handful of times.
I
or
think
a
that's a
couple
big
handful of
distinction
times.
because
like let's say
a lot of people are probably thinking right now, like, okay, well, anything that I have
Like
that
a step.
poses external resistance could be
step, yeah, but I'll cap it at 20 reps.
Right.
20 repetitions, meaning that truly there is not the ability outside of your engine. I'm not talking about you're so out of shape that a burpee makes you huff and puff so much that you're like, I can't do it. I'm talking about that, like the muscular contraction cannot be sustained more than 20 reps, 15 reps, 20 reps.
I think that when you look at sort of the curve of like diminishing returns, it's 6 to 30 reps.
Yeah.
It's so anything under 6 reps would be considered more like
It's true
let
strength.
me back this up a little bit. So that's hypertrophy is between 6 and 30 reps.
Well, it's, okay,
Hypertrophy occurs between 6 and 30 reps.
6 and 15.
30.
I mean, yeah, okay,
30.
okay. So let's break this down,
Hypertrophy.
right? Yeah, hypertrophy. But technically, by definition, you'd be in a strength endurance phase by textbook definition. So
Right.
the idea there's an inverse relationship about how much force a muscle produces and the amount of repetitions it can do. Meaning if it's the most weight that I can lift once on a bench press, I'll only be able to do it once. 1 rep max. And generally it's like anything under 6 safely, some say under 8, is considered strength training. Right? And then the idea would be that like that 6 to 8 range up to 15 is hypertrophy, which hypertrophy is just what bodybuilders go for, the growth of a muscle. And then technically anything after that is going to be strength endurance. So like a swimmer might choose to do a banded exercise for 25 reps. That's still in resistance and still in a strength endurance phase, meaning they can't do it more than that, but it's to assist in their high repetition sport. And the crossover, it's almost like the energy systems. You're never just using one energy system at a time. The crossover is always going to happen. So strength training, even if you stick to 5 reps, will create hypertrophy, right? Hypertrophy will also create increases in strength. And fundamentally, if you're strong enough to lift 500 pounds on a squat, doing 100 pounds for many repetitions for strength endurance will be that much easier.
Right. Yeah.
So there's going to be a crossover in all of them, but technically they have different. So yeah, no doubt, up to 30 reps will create hypertrophy, but anything above 15, 20 starts to get into a category of strength endurance, which might have a specific use for, let's say, a rock climber or something of that, just to pull out the technical definitions.
Yeah, and this is where the sort of like nuance between if people are strength nerds or fitness nerds and you say, oh, I'm getting stronger, I can finish my whole boot camp class now without stopping. It's like, that's not actually strength. That's actually just a improved glycolytic pathway.
Yeah.
But
interval aerobic.
But there is such a thing as building strength within a rep range too. So let's just take a 20 rep squat, which is popular. Like a 20 rep squat is like a challenging thing to do.
Program,
It's an infamous thing. So if in January my 20 rep squat is 100 pounds, and by December that same year I've increased it to 200 pounds, it's endurance technically, but I'm fucking stronger.
Without question. There's no doubt.
You can build strength within rep range. Technical classification of strength is typically like 6 and under, 5 and under, something like that.
Yeah, like the pure expression of your ability to move the most amount of weight, right? So I think that's, so resistance training, though, fundamentally is anything resistant. Again, like body weight can apply to what we just said. There can be strength training in terms of the rep range. There can be hypertrophy training in the rep range, and there can be strength endurance in the rep range.
And this is where the relativity of it comes into play, because dosage matters, and the dosage is the poison. And it's super important, I think, to understand where you are on that spectrum, because if you're completely deconditioned, just doing 3 sets of like 10 bodyweight squats and 10 suspension rows maybe could be like could destroy you.
Yeah, like you might not be able to walk. Those squats will get you.
Where that might just be a basic warm up for a more intermediate trainer.
Yeah, that just might be like practicing the motion. That might even not be like that just could be.
And so you really just got to understand like it's perfectly fine to start very small. In fact, when you think of progressive overload training and super compensation and all these sort of like older classical definitions of programming and periodization, it's advisable to start easy. A lot of programs that I buy from people who are way smarter than me online, they make the first couple weeks are almost like too easy, like 2 or 3 sets of something. Yeah. But then by week 6, you're doing like 8 sets, because it's every week you're progressing, and you're starting out so little, you're allowing your body to almost flirt with decondition, so that way it's the soil is very fertile for, or ripe, I should say, or fertile, because then it would be ripe later, but fertile for stimulus.
Yeah.
Adaptational response.
Well, yeah, and I think there's also, there's so many components of it, of which we can talk about, but like there's skill set to resistance training. Like you have to know how to do a movement, or like no doubt you can just squat, but there's definitely wrong ways to squat, right? There's improper movement patterns. And so I think there's a component of learning the skill set when you start a program or start doing any type of resistance training. Just learn how to do it right. And I also think it's like anything, to your point of like, it might not seem like a lot, but that it is actually enough to create an adaptation in the beginning. And it's also kind of like building the behavior
Right.
right? Because we just had a whole talk about habits and those kind of things. Of like,
Nothing matters if you're not consistent.
it doesn't matter. So it's like sometimes it's just a matter about like, hey, let's include this in your week.
Yep.
Let's not make it too big of a commitment. Let's not make it that you need like a handicap bar for your toilet. You know, after the first day, like, oh shit, you know.
Meaning you squatted so hard you can't even
You can just
sit down.
just sit on the toilet,
Yeah.
which is excruciating.
Your
So I
body's
think there's a
just in
component
pain.
of
Right.
just being able to ingest something. So there's a multifaceted to that.
So a lot of America, a lot of the world struggles with weight loss, and I think that there's a little confusion around what types of training one should do in pursuit of weight loss. And I think that if we think back at the very first thing that we said in this episode, it's like this needs to be the foundation of programming, whether or not you're trying to lose weight or build muscle or whatever your goal is.
Yeah.
It's more of if you're not achieving it, but you're strength training, that's probably more of a dietary thing. But specifically speaking for folks who may need to lean out first, who may need to lose some weight, burn some body fat.
It's just the primary mission. Even if that is like I want to lose body fat.
Right.
It's like
Oftentimes they think, well, I associate strength training, or strength training might even be the wrong word, but really just like weight training.
yeah, resistance. And another thing, sometimes
Yeah.
strength, weight, and resistance training are all kind of synonymously
Yeah,
used.
yeah.
So unless we're specifically talking about strength training in the rep range game, like strength training, weight training.
Just weight training, resistance training,
yeah.
holding some weights in your hand,
Some bands,
getting under
some
some weight,
something, something.
getting some weights in your hands.
Resisting.
But like, why does this benefit people who are trying to burn fat and lose weight? Let's say someone needs to lose 30 pounds. Why should they strength train? Why should they lift weights?
Right. Well, so I think there's a few caveats on why I think resistance training is so important for that avenue of a path, right? And so one is going to be that there's an idea that the more lean muscle mass we have, meaning muscle tissue, the higher our metabolism is, and therefore the more calorie expenditure we have per day. And so assuming that somebody is taking the proper path for weight loss, which is going to be with food, right? It has to be through food, do it right. Therefore, playing that game of calorie surplus, calorie deficit, the more energy you're using and burning in a day, the easier it's going to be to create a deficit. Right? So by either increasing or maintaining your lean muscle mass, you're going to have a higher output of calories, which means that scale of output to how much you're consuming will be easier to achieve. Right? If you're outputting 4,000 calories, it's easy to get under 4,000. If you're only outputting 1,200 calories, like if you've ever eaten 1,000 calories, it's nothing. Very hard to create a deficit. So that's going to be one thing. And one thing resistance training does, or another way to look at that, is that in a deficit, which is what's going to be required to lose fat, your body's going to want to pull off of all of the tissues. So not only do you tend to lose body fat when you're in a deficit, you also tend to lose some muscle mass.
Right. This is what people don't realize is that, when you're catabolic, you're catabolic. When you're anabolic, you're anabolic. And now
Catabolic being like reducing, anabolic being building.
And we can manipulate that through macronutrients, like making sure you're high protein, higher carbs, so that we can maintain the muscle tissue, even though you're in a overall caloric deficit and burning body fat. And a big part of that is obviously continuing to maintain the stimulus to keep muscle tissue on you.
Exactly.
Because if you're signaling constantly, because you're every single week, push, pull, legs, back, push, less squats, you're moving weight, you're training every single muscle, your body's going to be like, well, we're using this, we can't lose it.
Yeah.
And that's actually a law, use it or lose it, right? One of the fitness laws.
Yeah, so fundamentally is going to at least maintain or help to maintain the amount of lean muscle mass that you have while you're in a caloric deficit, which is therefore going to help you keep a higher metabolism, keep a higher calorie output just by living, so that the calorie deficit is easier to maintain or more drastic. So that's one just fundamental caveat of why resistance training is so important.
It keeps muscle
weight loss
tissue
phase.
on you.
It keeps muscle tissue on you in a caloric deficit.
So you're not just losing muscle and fat at the same pace.
Which we don't want anyway, but then by the more muscle we keep, the more calories we burn, the higher our metabolism is.
Yeah.
So that's just fundamentally...
The less deep you have to go in a deficit.
The less deep, yeah, exactly. So I think that's really an important thing to understand and maintain, is that we're looking to change body composition, which is decrease body fat and maintain or increase lean mass. We're not, when we talk about losing weight, we're almost always talking about toggling composition.
Right.
Losing weight's just a general term
Unless
for the
you're
scale.
like a wrestler that needs to make weight.
Exactly.
But for 99% of us, we're just talking about burning fat.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other components is that true strength training or true weightlifting, hypertrophy to strength, to use back to those terms, but really lifting heavy things is going to have a hormonal response.
Definitely.
And so fundamentally, there's going to be an increase in growth hormone, especially from doing like big, heavy muscle groups like legs, deadlifts, squats, and lunges. And then for men, particularly, an increase in testosterone as well. Although for women, but obviously we know women don't produce testosterone in the same way. Not that they don't have it. But fundamentally, spikes in growth hormone and spikes in testosterone. Both of which do what, right? Increase lean muscle mass or maintain lean muscle mass and decrease body fat, fundamentally.
Right.
Like that's why they're anabolic steroids, back to anabolic, the build. Like those are the two cornerstone cliche anabolic steroids is human
Keeps
growth
it fun
hormone.
in the bedroom too.
Yeah, so there's going to be a component where other forms of exercise like tennis or cycling or running aren't going to have this hormonal response, and the endocrine system is so powerful at determining our moods and look and all that kind of stuff. So those are like, I think, two really important cornerstones that I would say are the primary things of why somebody on a fat loss mission needs to include it, right? And then I think you were talking about also kind of talking to like stagnancy and moving calories through.
Yeah. So, one of the big things, and this is an interesting topic that I really enjoy exploring, and I've been really getting more and more into. This is where BMI isn't fair in a lot of ways, because
Body mass
index, right? And body mass is a very, very broad measurement that just kind of categorizes people from their height and their weight, and there's just sort of like a green, yellow, and red zone, and it's very broad. In general, what we know over thousands of people over many, many years, smaller people tend to live longer, right? That's just kind of one of the blanket facts about living a long life, is that if you're bigger, you tend to die a little bit sooner. And that kind of goes across almost every animal species. But what we also know is that it's not so black and white. And you can have two people who are, let's just say, 300 pounds.
Yep.
One person is 300 pounds who doesn't do anything. They don't move their body. They don't exercise. They eat terribly. And typically, what's going to happen is, even though these two people might have the same BMI, the person who's not exercising at all, they're probably going to have smaller extremities. They're probably going to have huge, very large stomachs, because what happens is, if you're not weight training, then you're not creating a pathway, a channel for your body to metabolize calories through. So you didn't get to 300 pounds typically by not over-consuming food. Typically, that's how people get to that weight. 250, 300, anything that would be considered obese, right?
Calorie surplus.
Most folks are getting there because they are, on average, over-consuming food. Now, the caveat to that, though, is that if you're the other person who might also be 300 pounds, maybe you love food and you're not going to give it up. But
it's changing.
You train.
Yeah.
You have a training program. You move your body. You push weight around. Maybe you go outside for a walk. And so even though you're the same BMI as case study B, but you're case study A and you're still 300 pounds and your BMI is still 35, but you're training and you're moving your body and you're creating a channel for your body to process these calories through. And then what you're going to typically look like, so we got case study B where the person's probably more skinny extremities, arms and legs, because there's no muscle tissue, and a big pot belly, because what's happening is that there's nowhere for your body to put these calories anymore. Your insulin receptors are gone. The muscles there's no muscle tissue to store glycogen.
Just pure fat stores.
The only place to put it is around your organs. It's called fatty liver syndrome, which is basically knocking on diabetes' door.
Yep.
And that person could have the exact same BMI as participant A, who trains and might have, this person, man or woman, might have more muscular extremities and they're still big, but maybe it's not such a huge stomach. It's a little bit more proportionate to the rest of their body. Think of like, like a rugby player or something like that. It's like a broader person, where that person is very metabolically healthy actually, and they're probably going to live a long, healthy life relative to the other person. And so that's another benefit of strength training. Even if you're like, dude, I don't give a shit about losing weight or
Counting
getting skinny.
calories or
I don't want
macros.
to count. I want to eat. Then at least strength train. So you're creating that channel. You're creating that pathway for your body to metabolize all of the calories you're consuming, and you're probably just going to get really big and strong.
Put them into something.
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
I mean, because
exactly.
basically those people that might weigh the same and have the same height and have the same BMI, the composition is going to be fundamentally different.
Right.
Right. The other person's going to have a stimulus from muscle growth, and the surplus of calories, while not all of it, they might have a little belly, is going to go into that muscular growth. I mean, I am considered overweight by BMI standards because,
Pretty crazy.
it's just because like by having a little more muscle, not that I'm like super jacked, I'm not a bodybuilder, but just by having more muscle than what is considered like the norm of a healthy person, that's a height to weight ratio that's normal. I have more muscle mass, and therefore I'm considered overweight by BMI. So, I mean, and then, and BMI is a poorer representation, I think, in the end.
It's a way to measure it. It's not the way to measure it. I think that it's like scale weight. It's a way, not the way. So you kind of look at body fat levels, scale weight, BMI, and you can kind of create the ideal shape. And it's a personal choice. If you're moving your body, but maybe your BMI is a little bit on the higher end, but you're like training, you're doing probably pretty well.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to take the next step for aesthetics and like vanity, nothing wrong with that.
No, then you want the sport of bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Well, and so in some other ways, I think to continue to drive home, because I think fat loss is such a sought after thing, is that there's this thing called EPOC, which is exercise post oxygen consumption, which is the idea that the more oxygen you use in a moment has this like residual effect of continuing to use more oxygen and burn more calories. And so aerobic activities can do it. Yeah, but weight training is also very effective at creating a responsive EPOC. And so that means when you resistance train, you're going to have this post-exercise caloric burn. But one of the other things that, unlike cardio, where cardio tends to be the calories that you use are going to be within that moment, right? And so cardio tends to use a little bit more of a caloric expenditure in the rate of activity, meaning if you were to like run for an hour versus weight train for an hour, in that hour, you'd probably expend more calories from the running.
Right.
But what's going to happen is that because you're actually breaking down your muscle and creating this growth response, this adaptive response that's going to take 2 or 3 days to then rebuild the muscle back up, that cardio will not include. That there's actually this effort that goes into rebuilding your muscle tissue that doesn't happen from the cardiovascular activity, that's going to consume calories and take work. And
that's what we were talking about. That you're creating that channel for the
exactly. And
so you have like the head of like the spike of calorie burn where
in the activity
where maybe running for that
and
45
it's not
minutes.
that different. I mean, the weight training will be lower. It's not like weight training is like a half. It just won't be quite as much. But then once cardio is done, it's out. Whereas the curve of it is like this.
Yep.
Whereas weight training is going to have this long-term curve that's sitting there repairing muscle and all that thing. So I think those are the primary caveats of why weight training or resistance training is essential no matter what, but specifically for fat loss.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that long-term it's just more enjoyable, really. I mean, like, if I'm finishing my day and I'm like, fuck, I got to work out, and it's like...
Yeah.
I got to just lift weights for 45 minutes. I'm probably going to be like, all right. But if I'm like, I got to go do like a gnarly spin class, I'm going to be like, ugh, that's tough.
Unless
that
it's Soul Cycle with scented towels.
Well, if they have
candles,
towel, they lure you in.
Hoorah, black light. No, but it's true because I think it goes back to like, like we talked about in our last episode, like it's rare that I want to work out. But the positive benefits I get from that feeling powerful and overcoming obstacles, not that running 10 miles isn't overcoming an obstacle, but there's a certain empowering feeling of weight training and resistance training that I just don't find other places. And like sometimes I'll weight train so hard that I'm just like, oh. But a lot of time I walk out, and even if I am like that, I'm kind of like,
you're ready to go.
I'll fucking walk through a wall right now.
You just got yourself all jazzed up.
Yeah, I mean, I just was working. I was just working with a client. Actually, your neighbors actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about how he's just feeling so much better in his body from the training that we've been doing. And that he literally just like, you know, his wife was playing music or DJing, and he just like literally danced around the apartment, like, you know, with his cat and just in general, just dancing, because he just felt so good in his body. And he's trained with trainers before. They used to do CrossFit, was their old trainer, so they were working hard. But you know, we're doing some very specific, educated strength training. We're having fun with it. We're having doing some handstand work, you know. But like, he just felt so good in his body from the training that he actually chose to just dance.
And this is an interesting topic, right?
But I don't know if like if you were doing like marathon training,
no,
you would just be like, oh, I feel so good in my body, I'm going to choose to dance,
the
right?
disbursement of energy and activities diminishes the overall acquisition of skill over any one of those things. And so this is so it's so interesting we're talking about this. I was literally just watching Dr. Mike Isratelli, Renaissance periodization guy, smart guy. You guys should listen to him.
Yeah, Renaissance periodization to credit him appropriately. Great YouTube channel.
So he was talking about this because he was analyzing, I think like Conor McGregor's training routine, and like they were doing like a typical like I guess you could call it like a CrossFit style training where it's like pushing a sled and doing pull-ups and then, you know, doing like cleans and.
So true cross training in that way.
Like cross training. Like
cross training meaning like the word CrossFit came from the idea of cross training, and cross training would be to include strength training, like a heavy deadlift for 3 reps into
a quarter mile run
right. to maybe a set of pull-ups at a hypertrophy. You know, like you're bringing in all these different modalities.
But his point, and this is interesting, is that like, and it comes back to this to your Brian, my neighbor, your client. It's like when you do that, like that makes a lot of sense conceptually, and there is a world where you just get so metabolically fit where you can still focus on a heavy lift and feel a pump and like execute good technique while your heart's at 80% of its max. But for the vast majority of us, it's at a price. It sacrifices the quality of the other, and we never get the maximum benefit of either one of those modalities when we combine them too much like that. Now listen, there's an argument to be made for circuit training
and cross training. I mean, there is a world, right? Especially like as a fighter, that makes sense. Right. You might have to lift an opponent, which is a heavy lift, into something else. But we're not. But we're not fighters. That's a sport. That's a very specific.
But if I'm running a quarter mile and then trying to go and do a back squat, I am fundamentally limiting my ability to ever reach peak ability on that back squat. And then one can make the argument, you can get cardio from other activities in isolation. They don't have to necessarily be while you're strength training, but while you're strength training, you should focus on that, because when you give yourself the space, meaning there's ample rest and recovery between your sets, you're not trying to throw everything in there, then there's like this stimulus fatigue ratio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not fatigued, and so therefore my stimulus is much higher. So I can actually like reach this like potential of my strength,
100%.
which is only going to translate even better into my athletics.
You're absolutely right. There's a degree of like, you know, you want to be able to perform, and if you're really fatigued, your ability to perform isn't going to be there, right? And that's exactly to your point of like in a strength training situation, your ability to lift that heavy weight is based on you being very recovered and being kind of rested and able to apply yourself maximally.
Right.
If there's other things pulling off of that maximal effort, you never get to go there. It's almost like the bell is only going to ring as loud as you hit it. And if if all these things are pulling away from you that you can only like ring the bell so loud,
you have to go run a marathon before
no matter how hard you hit it. Versus if you are fresh and you fucking ring that bell, it's going to ring a lot louder. And you can kind of think about how loud that bell rings is the adaptive response that's going to happen in your body.
And I think that so many people associate just like training with these like circuits and boot camps. And like, listen, I'm not trying to say don't do it. Anything's better than nothing. If that's all you can do, then by all means do that.
And it is some form, I mean, like no doubt you doing the amount of squats in there. It's not of benefit, but it's not.
If you could have a couple of just pure strength training days per week where it's like I am only doing push exercises and I'm only doing pull exercises and I'm only doing leg exercises, your ability to adapt and progress and reach your potential and your strength is only going to make you better at whatever sport you do that requires athleticism and cardiovascular endurance.
Yeah. I mean, well, they call like lunges the sprinter's exercise because fundamentally it matches that sprinting thing, right? When you're sprinting, your torso is completely upright, your legs are all spread out, and the driving mechanisms are similar. So sprinting will make you stronger. Sprinting is great. You can't hate on sprinting. But fundamentally, I don't think there's only so much benefit a sprint or you running really fast is going to translate to a lunge. It's just not going to make you a mega beast at the lunge. But if you make yourself, back to what we were saying, if you make yourself really strong at the lunge,
if you're lunging with 60s in your hands,
you're going to run that much faster.
Explosive.
Yeah,
right?
it's just going to happen, right? So that's the fundamental. Okay, so so what do you, in your opinion, is like where does a beginner start? What is training? Let's just say with frequency, right? How many or just what's a good way to look at the map of how much is too much, what's not enough?
We have both. So we got bookends, right? We have on the end of it, we have minimum effective dose.
Right.
And even within minimum effective dose, that's a relative statement because the dosage is relative and the dosage is the poison.
Yeah.
And if you do too much, it could really be harmful.
Well, let's just to make sure, like minimum effective
scale,
dose,
we have
right?
we have minimum effective dose. On the other end of that spectrum, you have maximum recoverable volume. So what's the maximum amount of volume?
What do you mean by minimum effective dose? And I know that could change from person to person.
What's the minimum I can do? What's the minimum dosage I can take or do in this scenario that elicits an adaptational response?
Got it.
And believe it or not, it's very little. When you look at some of the more recent studies on it, like honestly, if you did one set of push-ups a week to failure, that's actually enough stimulus to continue to maintain and progress.
If you did that for a year, once a week, to failure, which is hard, but to failure to mentally go there, for a year, you're gonna see improvements.
Right.
It's not, so.
Yeah. So I think that like if you look at like we'll just take three sort of very basic scenarios. You have beginner and intermediate and advanced. And if you're advanced, you probably already know what you should be doing. But let's say like more like intermediate and beginner people.
Well, what's the other bookend? Because it's the
maximum recoverable volume.
Maximum. So can you explain that one? Maximal recoverable
what's the
volume.
Maximum amount of volume that your body can recover from?
Yeah,
and
what's
again,
the most that you can do that you can actually not be injured or recover properly or live to fight another day or anything.
And what do we know? So we know that like honestly, minimum effective dose can just be like one set of something. But I would say a really solid place to start is go for 3. Warm up and do 3 good, high-quality sets of each particular exercise. Pick a compound movement that requires your pushing muscles, your chest, your shoulders.
More than one joint.
And then do a nice complex exercise that requires your back muscles, like rows would be a great one to start with. TRX, rows, dumbbell, machine, whatever. And then a good one for your legs, squats or lunges, right? And so even if you're just getting started, even just doing like, pick those 3 body parts and just do like 3 sets to about 85% failure, or maybe like in 7 to 8 on your perceived rate of exertion, like how intense it feels to you, which is a relative statement by design, but you need to know like, where does this land for me right now? And then in a year from now, that might be a lot different, but where am I right now? Am I about a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10? That's probably a good place to go ahead and stop. You don't have to go all the way to gut-wrenching fatigue because that's usually when bad forms kicks in and you're going to start to create bad habits. So at least 3 sets of a muscle group, bare minimum once a week. 2 is better. 3 is probably best. And then time permitting, you just continue to just add more volume. Either add a second exercise you do 3 sets each of, or tack on a 4th or a 5th set of just one exercise. But that would be where I'd start for sure.
Okay.
Keep it super simple.
Minimum once a week, but a few sets once a week, and then, increasing to 2 or 3.
Like if you trained twice a week and you did a full body workout twice a week, don't worry about like isolation lifts just off the bat, but just like a compound push, a compound pull, and a compound leg. And you did that for maybe 4 or 5 sets per body part on a Monday. You rested a couple of days and you came back and you did it again on a Thursday. Like you're going to be probably better off than 90% of people
Absolutely.
in this country.
And I think that even for a really trained individual, obviously a trained individual will probably need more volume or more frequency. But I even think that that bookend is more widely applied to everybody. Meaning that even if you had a trained individual, even if I just went and did 1 or 2 or 3 sets of deadlifts, but I really hit it, and I did 1 set of bench press and I really hit it. But just did that actually just one exercise for 3 sets once a week. But I'm trained, and so I know what my numbers are. I know how to fucking mentally go there. I know how to really push myself, and I know I'm making sure that I'm pushing myself appropriately. That I think even for a trained individual, that would still incur some pretty good benefits.
Oh, for sure.
But I think the other end of the bookend is a little hazier.
Well, now it's kind of more like what's the literature say, and it's basically like
So like, what is too much, basically?
We hit like kind of peak hypertrophy around 10 to 20 sets per week.
Which is
per
already a
muscle
big
group.
swing.
It's a big swing.
But still,
And then after 20 sets per muscle group would just be considered junk volume and diminishing returns. And now you're
just doing too much damage to the muscle.
just
The
too
recovery
much.
can't happen as well.
The stimulus is tanking.
You're breaking
It's
down
just-
muscle tissue unnecessarily.
So I personally like to stick between about 10 sets per muscle group per week. I find that like as I get older, and in case you guys haven't noticed, I'm freaking go gadget arms over here. So like I'm like the Eiffel Tower, you know, like I'm just basically I'm like if you looked up like asymmetrical in the dictionary, it'd be like my body. But because of that, like I can't do 20 sets. If I did 20 sets of chest in a week, I would have just my shoulders would be screaming, and I know what I'm doing. Like I do it with good form. I just know my body.
Yeah.
And so I found that when you're a natural lifter, meaning you're not taking steroids, and you're on the wrong side of 35.
the best side.
The best side of 35,
That's right.
but sometimes the best is the wrong.
You read my mind.
But you know, like I'll be 40 years old this year. I've had my fair share of injuries. I did competitive kickboxing in my 20s, so there's a lot of asymmetrical movements. And, you know, for me to train more than 10 sets per muscle group per week, like it's probably going to eventually turn into some sort of like chronic injury, tendinitis, or just some nagging pain that's just not worth it. And so for me, more frequency, less volume.
That's
I'd
an
rather
experienced lifter, right?
Yeah.
Well, so let's break it down. So I'd say just in a nutshell, it's like at least hit a target muscle group once a week.
Minimum.
Right, minimum. A few sets can do it. 2 to 3 times a week, I think, is great for the amount of times per week, and it can just be that same volume. Anything above that, you're starting to getting to more complex programming, which I think if you're getting in that world, you're talking about split routines, you know. But optimally, I think it's like twice a week to stimulate a muscle group or a muscle. So pushing exercises twice a week, and then maybe at most 20 sets per muscle group.
At most.
And then anything else like that is just if you're not getting the results from that volume, I would just say you're not working out hard enough.
And if you're training 20 sets, you better have your nutrition tight. Like, because if you're not fueling your body, like if you're trying to like lose fat, and you're also that would imply you're in a calorie deficit.
Yeah, and then doing.
You're under eating, and you're also trying to train with 20. Like you're gonna burn out. You're gonna hurt yourself.
You're breaking down muscle tissue at that point.
Yeah.
You're not even. You're
gonna feel so flat. So 20 sets would be like I'm in a push phase. I'm in a calorie surplus. I'm sleeping 8 hours a night.
Big.
And my intention is to put on size.
Yeah.
For the rest of us, at least 3 sets per muscle group per week. 6 is probably better.
Yep.
10 would probably put you in sort of the 90th percentile of humans, and then anything above that, really want to make sure the nutrition is on point.
Is sound.
But
absolutely.
I think that like if we were to like really map it out, I'd say if you're somewhere between beginner and intermediate, you're kind of in that phase, beginner, advanced beginner, low intermediate. There's nothing wrong with doing full body workouts.
Well, I was gonna say full body workouts, right?
Just take a 90-second breather between every set, but you could do like just 3 sets of chest or push, 3 sets of pull or back, 3 sets of shoulders, 3 sets of legs, and then rest a couple days, and then just come back and do that exact same thing over again, or maybe just change the exercises you do a little bit, but still same muscle groups, and that can get you very far.
Yeah.
And then once you have time and experience to break it into 3 times a week, now we can probably go into more of like we're breaking your lifts and your training into different body
So
parts.
some type of split.
But
Yeah.
if it's
if
two
you've been
of-
in it long
yeah.
enough, your experience, even at 3, you can split, but then maybe you start doing it 4 times a week. And then you should definitely split.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But that takes time, and I think you can get most of what you need out of it by just doing it. And this is a caveat. I'm going to do a little side rant here, but I think it's important to understand that, like, I was reading and kind of doing some research for this class, that most people without a trainer or a lifting buddy will operate so submaximally that they'll rarely go above 50% of their 1 RM, meaning that if you can lift 100 pounds on the bench press, that they through their own devices will rarely lift above 50% or 50 pounds. And one of the things that I think matters is that you have to work out hard. It's difficult mentally and physically to lift a weight that's really heavy to your ability. And I think that when you say 3 sets, if you do a half-ass 3 sets where you're lifting some weight, better than nothing, not going to hate on it, versus a 3 sets where at the end of the set of 10, you're barely getting it up. It's a very different stimulus.
Totally.
So I just want to make sure that people understand, like, when we're talking about weight training, all of it's going to be good, but if you can mentally go there and push yourself really hard, even if it's on a very easy skill set machine with a predetermined movement track, and
Fine.
but just you kind of got to get in that grind, and that comes
Yeah.
with time, no doubt, as well. But I just do want to kind of side rant to that caveat.
And that's the perceived rate of exertion.
Yeah.
And so if you finish the set and like there's been 0 uptick in heart rate, there's no sort of like
Burn,
metabolite burn,
fatigue, ripping sensation.
a minute goes by and there's no sort of like pumping of the muscle of any sort.
You feel like you could go, if you could feel like you could go right back in within 30 seconds to a minute.
Like if
probably
if you just knocked out 15 reps and you're like, you know, talking to somebody or you have like your earpiece, like it's not hard enough. On the other hand though, you don't want to get to the place where once you reach that feeling of fatigue and you get that little shake in your arm, that you keep trying to go, because now what's going to happen is that compensation.
Right, the form failure.
Form failure. And so what I like to say is keep 1 or 2 reps in the tank.
Yeah.
If it's a higher risk movement like a deadlift or a squat, which has a risk of maybe injuring your back if you go too hard, you might want to keep 2 reps in the tank. You know,
doubt.
so maybe
Of course.
by 10, it's like, oh, okay, like 9 was tough, 10 was tough. If I really wanted, I could get to 12. You should probably just stop at 10. That's okay.
For sure. And I think that's a, you know, just to not get in for time's sake, but there is form failure where the movement becomes so hard, your form degrades. And that's going to be one of the skill sets of an experienced lifter, has the ability to push farther without form failure than an inexperienced lifter. And that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, of just kind of don't be afraid to start small and don't have to go there. But at the same time, I did want to bring that up. I kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit because I'm trying to decide where to start. Because I'll say this. I think aesthetics is important to most people.
Hell yeah.
We all want to look good. I think when we look good, we feel good. When we are attracting the people we want to attract, when we're getting smiles. Not that that's what should be a primary motivator.
Laid.
We all, you know, I didn't want to say it.
Oh, I did.
Hanky fucking panky.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think fundamentally, looking good means feeling good. We all want to look good. A lot of people set out on fitness journeys to just simply look good. And I think it's really important. And so I'm going to, I know I got like a little other end to that of what I would like to say, but I'm going to ask you, I think a question that a lot of people ask, especially the women, does resistance training make you bulky? Like, are you like just like, you know, like just getting into some lifting of weights, just gonna
let's just take my client.
You're gonna get a coffee.
Yeah, let's take my client, Brian, different Brian. Okay, been with the guy for 10 years.
And this is a guy.
This is a guy.
So this is a guy who's naturally producing testosterone and
so
you know all those things.
He was 200 pounds when we started. Hadn't gone to the gym in 26 years, as he likes to joke and say. Protein shakes were like, what? No, he just eats pasta and Italian food every night with his clients for dinner, right?
Yeah.
10 years later, he is 165 pounds. He does 2 protein shakes every day. We lift 3 times a week, heavy. Like we're not heavy, but we're staying within like a 7 to 10 rep range typically, or 7 to 15. Let's be honest.
You're in the resistance umbrella.
But it's not like he's out there doing cardio. We just got his calories dialed in.
Yeah.
It's just to the best we could. He's eating less. He's drinking less alcohol. He's incorporating more protein in. We're not tracking macros. We're just making better choices. But the 85% of his training is just pure weight training, like curls, bench press.
Yeah.
And he's lost 35 pounds.
Okay.
He looks fit. He just looks like a very fit, thin, trim, athletic
he must
guy.
be way bulky at this point.
Right. And so his girlfriend just started training with us, and we're training similarly. I turn into a little bit more of a circuit because it's the two of them, but she's like, am I going to get bulky? And I'm like, listen, Brian does protein shakes every day. He's done nothing but pure strength training and weight training for 10 years, and he's lost 35 pounds. And if he's not going to get bulky as a shorter, stockier man,
Yeah.
then what on God's green earth makes you think that all of a sudden within 6 weeks of doing a 35-pound goblet squat that you're going to look like, She-Ra?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's
not gonna happen.
It could, but it's going to be way more dependent on the diet end of this equation than the exercise. Now, you're going to put on a little bit of muscle as your body just naturally has to acclimate to its environment. But 3 or 4 pounds of muscle dispersed over a 150-pound person is less than 1%. You're not going to notice it necessarily. It's just your body acclimating to the new environment by upregulating.
I think there are obviously these images of like women bodybuilders and things, and I just don't think people understand how dialed in their nutrition is to meet the goal of being that big.
And they're juiced.
And they're juiced, and they're working out like 3 hours a day.
Yeah, they're doing 20 sets per muscle group per week.
They're doing twice a day. So most bodybuilders go in the gym twice a day for a minimum of an hour each time, right? So it's like, I think it's there's, especially in women, there's a fear of being bulky. But I actually get asked by men a lot too, like, well, I don't want to be bulky, and it's like here's a little slice of humble pie. Like, you know how fucking hard it is to be bulky?
Yeah.
Like, good luck. Like, in your dreams almost. Like, and it's not to be harsh, but it's like, I think people have an unrealistic understanding of what it takes to put on that kind of muscle mass to be unappealingly aesthetically bulky.
Right.
Because that's what we're talking about, aesthetics.
Your BMI now is in the yellow or red,
you're
but it's pure muscle.
Yeah, it's like, that's not going to happen. And I think the caveat I saved was that I think, to that aesthetic point that we all want to look good, that weight training is one of the fundamental things that's going to make just about every single person look better. Outside of some particular genetics where you have extremely stocky shoulders or whatever. But even then, I think that male or female, no matter your age, no matter whether you have appropriate body fat or otherwise, that when you have a toned, developed musculature, you're going to be sexy as fuck.
Yeah, you sit up straight, your muscles are more supple, your skin looks
look
better.
Everything. Your shape just looks better. And so I think that's a good motivator. And I just want to touch on that. Like, it's not going to make you bulky. And I also think that the people that have some form of resistance on them are the most attractive.
Yeah, you'd have to put on 10% of body weight to start, probably more than 10% of your body weight to appear bulkier. And that, through muscle, is a huge amount. Like, that would be for me, that'd be 20 pounds. I can fluctuate 20 pounds and wear the same clothes and no one really notices. So
what are you trying to say?
I'd have, not unlike you, who it's very apparent that your BMI is in the wrong place, but that, and for me to do that, that's me dedicating, like, I'm taking creatine, I'm eating 3,500 calories a day. I'm lifting 5 days a week with isolation and hypertrophy style training with my intention of putting on weight. And even then, it's dispersed over a 200-pound body, and most folks aren't going to see a 10-pound increase.
No, it's
not going to see it.
So it's not going to make you bulky, people. It's going to make you sexy as fuck.
Yeah, and
Sexy
if you are
AF.
getting bulky, then it's probably because what's happening is you're not controlling your calories, and the exercise is increasing your appetite. So just track your calories and see if you're eating too much, then just cap it, bring it down to a maintenance or a slight deficit, and that'll stop your body from having surplus energy to convert into muscle tissue.
Yeah.
Leave it there, man. So good stuff. That was episode 4 already.
Episode 4 of why you should obviously be starting your strength training program tomorrow.
Lift some weighty weights. All right. We are out. See y'all
next time.
Peace.